breaks over Berkshire, England. Stone towers catch first light. Nearly 1,000 years standing. The oldest occupied castle in the world. Windsor. 13 acres of fortified stone. Over 1,000 rooms. 39 monarchs have called this home. But here's what the postcards never show. The bills. The endless, crushing, unrelenting bills. This place has been bleeding money since the day the first stone was laid. A castle that was supposed to project eternal power instead became a financial black hole that nearly bankrupted the crown more than once. Fire, war, renovation, scandal, each one costing millions, sometimes billions, and the question nobody asks out loud, was it ever worth it? If you enjoy deep investigations into royal architecture and the hidden costs behind Britain's most iconic buildings, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which royal property we should investigate next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. December 1066. William the Conqueror stands on English soil, barely 3 months after Hastings. He's won the battle. Now he needs to keep what he's taken. London sits 20 miles east. The Thames curves through the landscape like a defensive moat provided by nature itself. William's engineers study the terrain. They need fortifications. Fast. The location they choose will change everything. A chalk cliff rising above the river. High ground. Clear sight lines in every direction. Control of the road west toward Oxford. Control of river traffic. The perfect spot to remind the English exactly who's in charge now. The first Windsor Castle isn't really a castle. It's a modern bailey. A wooden tower on an artificial mound, surrounded by a timber fence. Basic, brutal, functional. The structure goes up in months, maybe weeks. The workforce is conscripted. Saxon laborers forced to build the instrument of their own subjugation. No wages, no choice. Just the implicit threat of what happens if they refuse. This is how conquerors work. They make the conquered build their own cages. The location is strategic genius. Windsor sits within a day's march of London, close enough to respond to threats, far enough to retreat if the city becomes unsafe. William builds 8 other fortifications in a ring around London at the same time. Windsor, the Tower of London, Berkhamsted, Hertford, each one a stone and a noose tightening around the capital. The message is clear. Resistance is pointless. We control everything. The wooden castle serves its purpose for about 70 years. But wood rots. Wood burns. Wood doesn't impress foreign kings or intimidate rebellious barons. In the 1170s, Henry II decides Windsor needs to be permanent. He begins replacing timber with stone. The work takes decades. Stone arrives from quarries miles away. Each block is cut by hand, loaded onto carts, hauled by oxen along roads that turn to mud every winter. The logistics are staggering. Thousands of tons of limestone, hundreds of laborers, masons who know how to dress stone, carpenters who build scaffolding, blacksmiths who forge tools. The cost starts climbing immediately. Medieval accounting is spotty, but surviving records give us glimpses. In 1172 alone, Henry spends roughly £446 on Windsor. That's more than £350,000 in today's money, just for 1 year, and the project is nowhere near finished. The castle will consume funds for another century. Henry builds the round tower, the iconic feature that still dominates Windsor's silhouette today. It's not actually round, it's polygonal, but it's tall, imposing, visible for miles. That's the point. Architecture is intimidation. Stone announcing that this power is here to stay. Henry's grandson, Henry III, takes the project even further. Between 1216 and 1272, he pours money into Windsor, like water into sand. New walls, new towers, a chapel that rivals anything the church is building, decorative stonework, stained glass, painted ceilings. This is when Windsor stops being just a fortress and starts becoming a palace. The shift is expensive. Castles are about defense. Palaces are about display. Defense requires thick walls and narrow windows. Display demands space, light, luxury. Every upgrade means more craftsmen, more materials, more time, more money. Henry III spends an estimated £15,000 on Windsor over his reign. That's roughly £12 million today for a single building that he already owns. That's already functional. But functional isn't enough. Not for a king trying to project legitimacy in a country that still remembers when his family were French invaders. So he keeps building, keeps spending, keeps pushing the castle towards something grander, something that can stand beside the great palaces of France and not look inferior. The problem is that grandeur is a moving target. Every generation's idea of impressive gets outdated by the next. And Windsor, like every great building, is never really finished. It just enters a permanent state of becoming. Edward III inherits Windsor in 1327, and he has a vision. He wants to turn this fortress into the ceremonial heart of English chivalry. In 1348, he founds the Order of the Garter at Windsor. It's a knights' club, the most exclusive in Europe, only 24 members at a time. The king and his closest allies, bound by oaths, ritual, and the symbolism of a castle that's being rebuilt specifically to house their gatherings. Edward spends a fortune. Between 1350 and 1377, he pours an estimated £50,000 into Windsor. That's over £40 million in modern terms. He tears down buildings Henry III just finished, replaces them with bigger, more elaborate structures. He builds new residential quarters for the knights, a grand hall for feasting, a chapel where they can perform their religious ceremonies. Everything is designed to make Windsor feel like Camelot made real. The timing is almost grotesque. While Edward is spending tens of thousands of pounds on decorative stonework and gilded ceilings, England is being ravaged by the Black Death. Between 1348 and 1350, plague kills roughly a third of the population. Villages are abandoned. Fields go unplowed. The economy collapses. And the king is building a luxury palace. The contradiction is stark, but Edward doesn't see it as a contradiction. He sees Windsor as necessary. A symbol that the monarchy endures. That order persists even when disease is tearing the country apart. Whether the peasants dying in ditches found that comforting is not recorded. The 15th century brings civil war. The Wars of the Roses, York against Lancaster. Windsor becomes a prize to be held, lost, and reclaimed. The castle changes hands multiple times. Each time, the victors ransack what the losers left behind. Furniture stolen, tapestries cut down. Anything valuable, portable enough to carry, gets carried off. The damage is cultural and financial. Replacing what's been looted costs money the crown doesn't have. England is broke. Decades of war have drained the treasury. Maintenance at Windsor slows to a crawl. Roofs leak. Stonework crumbles. Rooms that were once showpieces turn into storage or get abandoned entirely. By the time the Tudors take the throne in 1485, Windsor is neglected, outdated, and expensive to maintain. Henry VII looks at Windsor and sees a problem. It's too medieval, too fortress-like. The new fashion is for lighter, more comfortable palaces. Hampton Court, Greenwich, places with bigger windows, better heating, more privacy. Windsor feels dark, cold, drafty. So Henry mostly ignores it. He spends money elsewhere. Windsor becomes a secondary residence. Still symbolically important, still used for state occasions, but no longer the center of royal life. That neglect will continue for over a century. Elizabeth I uses Windsor, but sparingly. She visits during summers, when the hunting is good, but she doesn't invest heavily in upgrades. The castle is functional. That's enough. The real drama happens during the Civil War. In 1642, Charles I and Parliament go to war. Windsor, like every royal property, becomes a military asset. Parliament seizes the castle in 1642. It becomes a garrison, a prison for captured royalists, a stronghold. Soldiers are billeted in rooms meant for kings. Horses are stabled in courtyards. The chapel is stripped of its papist decorations. Stained glass smashed. Statues defaced. This is ideological vandalism with a practical edge. Anything valuable gets sold to fund Parliament's army. The damage is immense. When the war ends and Charles I is executed in 1649, England briefly becomes a republic. Windsor sits empty. Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector, visits occasionally, but doesn't live there. The castle decays. Roofs cave in. Water seeps into stonework. Timber rots. By the time the monarchy is restored in 1660, Windsor is a wreck. Charles II returns from exile, determined to erase the Commonwealth and reassert royal grandeur. Windsor is part of that project. He hires Hugh May, a fashionable architect, to redesign large sections of the castle. The work begins in 1675. Charles wants Baroque interiors, painted ceilings by Antonio Verrio, carvings by Grinling Gibbons, opulent theatrical, French-influenced design that screams monarchy. The cost is staggering. Records show Charles spends over £130,000 on Windsor between 1674, that's roughly £20 million today. The money comes from taxes, loans, and chronic underpayment of workers and suppliers. Charles is constantly in debt. Windsor is one reason why. He borrows from merchants, delays payments to contractors, and raids funds meant for the Navy. The castle looks magnificent. The kingdom's finances are a disaster. But Charles believes, genuinely, that a king must look like a king. That majesty requires spending. That awe is worth the price. Whether the sailors unpaid on rotting ships agreed is unrecorded. The 18th century is relatively quiet for Windsor. The first two George, German-speaking monarchs from Hanover, prefer other palaces. Windsor is old-fashioned, inconvenient. They use it occasionally, but invest little. George III changes that. He loves Windsor, makes it his primary residence, and he starts another massive renovation. Between 1780 and 1820, George spends tens of thousands of pounds modernizing Windsor. He adds new apartments, updates heating systems, builds new kitchens, improves drainage. Some of this is practical. Windsor genuinely needs work, but George also wants comfort. He's not interested in medieval grandeur. He wants a home. The expense adds up, and George has an expensive hobby. He collects art, paintings, sculptures, manuscripts. He buys compulsively. Much of it goes to Windsor. By the time his mind starts failing in the 1810s, he's spent a fortune. His son, the Prince Regent, later George IV, inherits both the throne and the debt, and the Prince Regent has even more expensive taste. George IV is a disaster with money. Extravagant, self-indulgent, incapable of restraint. He decides Windsor needs to be completely rebuilt. Not renovated, rebuilt. He hires Geoffrey Wyatville, an architect willing to execute his wildest ideas. Work begins in 1824. The budget is set at £150,000. That's roughly £15 million today. It sounds like a lot. It's nowhere near enough. Wyatville tears down entire sections of the castle. He raises the height of the round tower by 30 feet, not because it needs to be taller, because it looks better. He adds battlements, turrets, Gothic details. He's creating a fantasy medieval castle, a stage-set version of history. The work drags on for years, costs spiral. By the time George IV dies in 1830, the project has consumed over £1 million. That's over £100 million in today's money. For a renovation, Parliament is furious. The press mocks the expense. Cartoons show George buried under piles of bills, but the work continues under his successor, William IV, and then Queen Victoria. Windsor is too far along to abandon. The sunk cost fallacy made stone. Victoria ascends the throne in 1837 at age 18. She loves Windsor. She marries Prince Albert there in 1840. They make it their primary family home. Albert takes charge of updating the castle's infrastructure. He's German, methodical, obsessed with efficiency and technology. He installs modern plumbing, gas lighting, better heating. He reorganizes the household management to cut waste. Some of the changes save money, but Windsor remains expensive. Maintaining a castle this size requires a permanent staff of hundreds: cooks, maids, footmen, grooms, gardeners, engineers. Each one draws a wage, needs housing, needs food. The castle operates like a small town, and Victoria expects it to run perfectly. Every state visit, every dinner, every ceremony must be flawless. Perfection costs money, always. Albert dies in 1861. Victoria is devastated. She retreats from public life. Windsor becomes her refuge and her prison. She rarely leaves, barely participates in state functions. For decades, Windsor is a mausoleum to her grief. The rest of the royal properties sit empty. The public grows resentful. What are we paying for, they ask, if the Queen won't even show herself? The question gets louder as the century ends. By 1900, Windsor has been continuously inhabited, renovated, and expanded for over 800 years. The costs have compounded into a sum that nobody can calculate precisely. Millions upon millions of pounds across centuries. Entire royal fortunes poured into stone, and the bills keep coming. Because castles never stop needing work. In 1910, George V inherits Windsor and a financial mess. The royal family is rich in property, but cash poor. Operating costs for all the palaces exceed income. World War I makes everything worse. Taxes rise. Income from royal estates drops. The family has to economize. Rooms at Windsor are closed. Staff is cut. Even the king feels the pinch. But the castle itself can't be ignored. Roofs still need repair. Pipes still burst. Windsor is too big to maintain, and too symbolically important to abandon. The 1930s bring abdication. Edward VIII gives up the throne for Wallace Simpson. His brother becomes George VI. And in 1936, George moves his family into Windsor. His daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, grow up there. Windsor becomes the family home again. Then World War II starts. London is bombed. The king and queen stay in Buckingham Palace during the day. But the princesses are sent to Windsor for safety. The castle becomes a refuge again. Not for the king this time. For his heirs. The government considers moving the royal family to Canada. George refuses. Windsor is fortified. Anti-aircraft guns on the grounds. Blackout curtains on every window. Sandbags around vulnerable structures. Paintings and treasures are moved to secret locations. The castle empties of luxury and fills with soldiers. Bomb damage hits Windsor's surroundings, but the castle itself survives intact. After the war, restoration begins again. Costs are now calculated in millions as standard. Elizabeth II inherits the throne in 1952. She inherits Windsor too. And the problem of how to pay for it. By the 1960s, it's clear the old system isn't working. The crown can't fund these palaces on private income. The government steps in. A deal is struck. The crown estate's profits go to the treasury. In return, the treasury funds the monarchy through the civil list and later the sovereign grant. Windsor's maintenance is now partially taxpayer funded. The public starts asking hard questions. Why are we paying to maintain castles? Why does the Queen need multiple palaces? What exactly are we getting for this money? The answers are vague. Tradition, tourism, soft power, national identity. All true, all hard to quantify. All inadequate when you're talking about millions of pounds every year. The debate intensifies through the 70s and 80s. The royal family's finances become a tabloid obsession. Every expenditure is scrutinized. Windsor is central to the criticism. November 20, 1992. A spotlight in the Queen's private chapel overheats. A curtain catches fire. Windsor Castle is burning. The fire starts small. It spreads fast. Within minutes, flames are climbing through timber ceilings, racing along dry wooden beams that have been in place for centuries. The alarm sounds at 11:33 a.m. Fire brigades from across Berkshire respond. They arrive to find smoke pouring from the northeast corner of the castle. The fire is already out of control. Over 200 firefighters battle the blaze for 15 hours. They pour millions of gallons of water onto the flames. Hoses snake through courtyards. Ladders lean against smoking walls. The fire consumes St. George's Hall, the state dining room, the Crimson Drawing Room. Over 100 rooms are destroyed or damaged. Ceilings collapse. Priceless art is threatened. Staff and volunteers form human chains, passing paintings and furniture out of danger. Somehow, they save almost everything valuable. The fire finally dies at 2:30 a.m. the next morning. The damage is catastrophic. 9 staterooms are destroyed. Over 100 more are damaged by fire, smoke, or water. The roof of St. George's Hall, over 180 feet long, has completely caved in. The initial estimate for repairs, £60 million. That's roughly £130 million today. The question explodes into public debate immediately. Who pays? The government's first instinct is that the state will cover it. Windsor is a national monument. Of course, taxpayers will fund the repairs. The public reaction is instant and furious. Why should we pay for the Queen's house to be fixed? She's one of the richest women in the world. She should pay for it herself. The tabloids go wild. Why should we pay? Screams one headline. The royal family is already under pressure. 1992 has been a terrible year. 3 of the Queen's 4 children have separated from their spouses. Diana and Charles's marriage is collapsing in public. Andrew and Fergie's split is equally messy. Anne's divorce is finalized. The monarchy looks dysfunctional, expensive, and out of touch. The fire becomes a symbol of everything wrong with the institution. Public anger forces a compromise. The Queen agrees to open Buckingham Palace to tourists. Ticket sales will fund part of the Windsor repairs. She also agrees to start paying income tax, something royals haven't done in decades. The government covers the rest. The final bill comes in under budget at £37 million. But the damage to the monarchy's reputation is harder to calculate. The restoration takes 5 years. Architects face a choice: restore the rooms exactly as they were, or take the opportunity to redesign. They choose a middle path. Some rooms are restored to their pre-fire appearance. Others are reimagined entirely. The new St. George's Hall has a hammer beam roof, inspired by medieval great halls. It's a modern interpretation of Gothic design. Beautiful, expensive, controversial. Critics call it Disneyfication. Defenders call it masterful. The debate misses the deeper question: why are we spending millions to recreate luxury that existed mainly for show? The work is completed in 1997. The Queen hosts a reception to mark the reopening. Windsor has survived again. But at what cost? The 21st century brings new financial pressures. Security costs explode after 9/11. Windsor needs constant patrols, surveillance systems, barriers. The threat environment has changed. Terrorism, drones, cyber attacks. Protecting a castle built in the 11th century against 21st century threats is expensive and often absurd. Energy costs soar. Heating Windsor Castle in winter costs a fortune. The building is thermally inefficient by design. Stone walls, single-pane windows, high ceilings. Every calorie of heat bleeds into the sky. Modern insulation is difficult to install without destroying historic fabric, so the castle stays cold and expensive. Staff costs remain high. Running Windsor requires chefs, housekeepers, curators, engineers, security personnel. Wages rise, pensions accumulate. The payroll never shrinks. Maintenance is relentless. Every year something needs fixing. Stonework erodes. Lead work on roofs degrades. Plumbing from the Victorian era finally gives up. Each repair costs tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds. The sovereign grant now covers these costs. In 2021-22, the sovereign grant was £86.3 million. Windsor is a significant part of that expense. The exact breakdown isn't public, but estimates suggest Windsor's operating and maintenance costs run into the tens of millions annually, every year, forever. Tourism provides some offset. Windsor Castle is one of Britain's most visited tourist attractions. Over 1.5 million people visit annually. They pay roughly £28 for an adult ticket. That's over £40 million in ticket revenue per year. Where does that money go? Into the Royal Collection Trust, the charity that maintains the Royal Art Collection and manages tourist access to royal properties. Some of it funds Windsor's upkeep, but not all. The finances are opaque by design. The public pays to visit. The public pays through taxes, and the full accounting of where all that money goes remains locked behind layers of trusts, grants, and private estates. Let's talk about what Windsor actually costs. Not in vague millions, in specifics. The sovereign grant in recent years has ranged from £40 million to over £86 million annually, depending on the formula tied to Crown Estate profits. Windsor is one of several properties covered, but it's the largest occupied castle, the most expensive to maintain. Energy bills alone are staggering. In 2020, it was reported that royal palaces spent over £2 million on energy in a single year. Windsor takes a significant chunk. Security costs are classified, but informed estimates suggest protecting Windsor costs over £10 million annually. Armed police, surveillance systems, barriers, constant patrols. The threat level is high. The costs follow. Staffing costs are harder to pin down, but Windsor employs hundreds: butlers, maids, chefs, engineers, gardeners, curators, salaries, pensions, training, millions per year. Maintenance and repairs vary wildly. A quiet year might cost £5 million. A major project can spike to £50 million or more. The roof needs attention every decade. Stonework requires ongoing conservation. Electrical systems need upgrades. Plumbing fails. Windows crack. The castle is a 1,000-year-old machine that constantly breaks down. Added up conservatively. Energy, £500,000. Security, £10 million. Staff, £15 million. Maintenance, £10 million. That's £35.5 million per year. And that's a low estimate. Some years Windsor likely costs closer to £50 million. Over a decade, that's £500 million. Over a century, £5 billion. And that's just operating costs. It doesn't include major restorations, security upgrades, or capital projects. Windsor has consumed more money than most small nations' entire GDP. Let's return to the deeper question. Was it worth it? What has Windsor actually delivered for all this expense? Symbolically, Windsor is powerful. It's the oldest continuously occupied castle in the world. That fact alone carries weight. It connects modern Britain to a medieval past. It provides a physical link to history. For some, that's priceless. For others, it's expensive nostalgia. Tourism generates revenue. £40 million per year is nothing to dismiss, but it doesn't cover costs. Not fully. The economic argument for Windsor is that it draws tourists who spend money elsewhere: hotels, restaurants, shops. The multiplier effect. Studies suggest royal tourism contributes over £500 million annually to the UK economy. Windsor is a significant part of that. But would tourists stop coming if Windsor closed? Versailles is mobbed. The French cut their king's head off centuries ago. The palace still draws millions. You don't need a functioning monarchy to have royal tourism. Soft power is harder to measure. When the Queen hosted state visits at Windsor, it mattered. Foreign leaders impressed by the setting, by the history, by the spectacle. Did it affect policy? Trade deals? Alliances? Maybe. A little. Impossible to quantify. National identity is even murkier. Windsor represents something to many Britons: continuity, stability, tradition. But it also represents class division, inherited privilege, public money spent on private luxury. For every person who feels pride seeing Windsor, another feels resentment. The staff who work at Windsor see it differently than tourists. They're inside the machine. For many, it's a good job, stable, prestigious. The palace provides training, housing in some cases, pensions. But it's also hierarchical, rigid, old-fashioned. Stories leak out occasionally, long hours, demanding standards. The pressure to maintain perfection for guests, for state occasions, for the family. It's not a normal workplace. You don't just work at Windsor, you serve. The language matters. Staff are servants. That word still gets used. In the 21st century, in a democracy, people still serve the crown. Some embrace it, some find it degrading. All are bound by strict confidentiality agreements. What really happens behind Windsor's walls stays there. The environmental cost of Windsor is significant and rarely discussed. Heating the castle burns massive amounts of fuel. Even with modern boilers, the inefficiency is staggering. Carbon emissions from royal properties are published. In 2020-21, royal travel and palaces emitted nearly 3,300 tons of CO2. Windsor is a major contributor. The royal family has pledged to reach net zero by 2030. For Windsor, that means major retrofits, solar panels, better insulation, heat pumps, all expensive, all complicated by the need to preserve historic fabric. You can't just drill through 12th century stone to run new cables. Every green upgrade requires archaeological surveys, heritage permissions, specialist contractors. The cost of making Windsor sustainable will run into tens of millions, and the clock is ticking. Water usage is another issue. Windsor sits in southeast England, a region facing increasing water stress. Maintaining the castle's gardens, fountains, and basic operations requires enormous volumes of water. During droughts, there's tension between heritage and environment. Should a castle's lawn stay green when residents face hosepipe bans? The royal household says it's working on sustainability. Progress reports are published, but the fundamental problem remains. Windsor was never designed for environmental efficiency. Retrofitting it is expensive, slow, and incomplete. Security has become Windsor's most expensive moving target. In the 1980s, protecting the castle meant guards at the gates and police patrols. Today, it means facial recognition cameras, drone detection systems, armed response units, intelligence coordination, and constantly updated threat assessments. Terrorism is one concern, but there are others. In 2021, a man armed with a crossbow broke into Windsor's grounds on Christmas Day. He wanted to assassinate the Queen. He was arrested before getting close, but the breach exposed vulnerabilities. Security was upgraded again. More cameras, more sensors, more personnel, more cost. The threat landscape keeps evolving. In 2023, concerns about drone attacks led to new counter-drone technology being installed. Classified systems that detect, track, and neutralize unauthorized drones. Cost? Unknown. Classified. Cyber attacks are another vector. Windsor's systems, communications, security are all digital now, vulnerable to hacking. Protecting against sophisticated state-level cyber threats requires constant vigilance and expensive expertise. Every year, the security budget grows, and every year, new threats emerge that require new countermeasures. There's no endpoint, no moment where Windsor becomes secure enough. It's an arms race that the castle can never win, only continue fighting. The fire in 1992 taught a hard lesson. Windsor is always one disaster away from catastrophe. Fire is the most obvious threat. Despite modern suppression systems, the risk remains. The castle is full of timber, tapestries, and centuries-old materials that burn easily. A single electrical fault could start another blaze. Flooding is increasingly likely. Climate change means more extreme weather. Heavy rains can overwhelm drainage systems built for a different climate. Water infiltration damages stonework, rots timber, destroys interiors. Windsor has flooded before. It will flood again. Structural failure is a slow-motion threat. The castle is 1,000 years old. Foundations shift. Stone erodes. Entire sections need shoring up periodically. In 2018, engineers found cracks in part of the structure that required emergency repairs. Cost: millions. Duration: months. These crises are inevitable, and each one costs a fortune to address. The question that haunts Windsor is simple. What happens next? The castle can't be sold. It's not private property in any normal sense. It's held in trust for the nation. It can't be demolished. Heritage laws and public sentiment make that unthinkable. It can't be abandoned. An empty Windsor would decay rapidly. Within decades, it would be a ruin. So it must be maintained, forever, at ever-increasing cost. Future monarchs will inherit the same problem, the same impossible math. A building too expensive to keep, too important to lose. The only solution is the one Britain has chosen. Pay for it. Through taxes, tourism, and the endless deferral of harder questions. But the pressure is building. Younger generations are less attached to monarchy, more willing to question the value of royal spending, more skeptical of tradition for tradition's sake. Climate concerns make maintaining inefficient historic buildings seem irresponsible. Economic pressures make spending tens of millions on a castle look tone-deaf. At some point, the math stops working. The political will to fund Windsor's upkeep erodes. What happens then? Partial closure? Conversion to a museum only? Reduced royal use? The answers aren't clear. What is clear is that Windsor's current model, a fully functioning royal residence and tourist attraction, is financially unsustainable without massive ongoing public subsidy. That subsidy depends on public tolerance, and that tolerance is not infinite. The deeper issue is what Windsor represents. It's a physical manifestation of inherited power. A castle that has passed from monarch to monarch for nearly a millennium, each generation adding to it, claiming it, justifying its expense through tradition. But tradition is just the past insisting on the present. Windsor exists because it has always existed. The money flows because it has always flowed. But always is not an argument. It's an evasion. The real argument for Windsor is emotional. It's beautiful. It's historic. It makes people feel something. Awe, pride, connection to the past. Those feelings are real. But are they worth £50 million a year, £500 million a decade, £5 billion a century? Is feeling connected to medieval power worth the cost of a functioning hospital, a dozen schools, thousands of social housing units? The comparison is uncomfortable. It's also necessary. Money spent on Windsor is money not spent elsewhere. That's not the castle's fault, but it's the reality. Every pound that goes to repairing Gothic stonework is a pound that doesn't go to a food bank, a mental health clinic, or a climate adaptation project. The choices reveal priorities. What matters more, heritage or housing, castles or care? These aren't easy questions. They don't have obvious answers, but they need to be asked, out loud, repeatedly, without the convenient evasion of tradition shutting down debate. The staff who maintain Windsor daily know its reality better than anyone. They see the leaks, the cracks, the endless small failures that add up to massive expense. They watch engineers patch problems that will resurface in 5 years. They see the tension between preserving the past and adapting to the present. Some love the work, the pride of maintaining something historic, the skill required, the knowledge that what they do matters, at least to those who value Windsor. Others see it differently, a Sisyphean task, pouring effort into a building that can never truly be fixed, serving an institution that feels increasingly out of step with modern life. Both perspectives are valid. Both exist simultaneously within Windsor's walls. The tourists who visit see none of this. They see the state apartments, the St. George's Chapel, the perfectly maintained gardens. They take photos, buy souvenirs, leave impressed. Most never think about the cost. Why would they? The ticket price feels reasonable. The experience feels seamless. The labor, the money, the systems that make it all work remain invisible. That's intentional. Windsor is theater. The audience sees the performance, not the machinery. But the machinery is the story, the centuries of expense, the countless workers, the endless stream of money flowing into stone, the political compromises that keep it funded, the disasters barely averted, the future that remains uncertain. That's the real Windsor, not the postcards, not the pageantry, the bills, the unrelenting, accumulating, never-ending bills. Let's look at specifics most people never consider. The cost of simply opening Windsor to the public is enormous. Security screening. Every visitor passes through metal detectors. Bags are checked. That requires staff, equipment, constant vigilance, traffic flow management. Over 1.5 million people per year means roughly 4,000 per day during peak season. Moving that many bodies through a medieval castle without damaging it or creating bottlenecks requires careful choreography, staff at every checkpoint, guides in every room, cleaning crews who work overnight, wear and tear, thousands of feet walking on historic floors, hands touching walls, moisture from breath affecting delicate interiors. Every visitor degrades the castle slightly. Multiply by millions. The cumulative impact is significant. Conservation becomes an ongoing battle. Insurance costs. Covering a property like Windsor against fire, flood, theft, terrorism is expensive. Premiums run into the millions annually. The risk profile is unique. Accessibility compliance. Modern regulations require disabled access. Retrofitting a 1,000-year-old castle with ramps, lifts, and accessible bathrooms costs a fortune. Every modification must respect heritage rules. Specialist contractors. Lengthy approvals. Costs multiply. These operational expenses exist separately from maintenance. They're the price of keeping Windsor open. Without tourism, these costs disappear. But so does the revenue. It's a trap. The castle needs tourism to justify the expense. But tourism creates expense. The cycle never ends. The psychological cost of Windsor is rarely discussed. The pressure on the royal family to live up to the castle's grandeur, to perform monarchy in a setting that demands constant perfection. The scrutiny that comes with occupying such a public space. For staff, the pressure to maintain impossible standards. The knowledge that any mistake, any visible flaw, reflects on Britain's image. For the public, the cognitive dissonance. Pride in the castle's beauty and history. Resentment at the cost. Frustration that such wealth and privilege persist in an age of austerity. All these tensions coexist, unresolved, mostly unspoken. Windsor's future likely involves compromise. Reduced royal residence use, more public access, greater financial transparency, possibly even partial closure of certain sections to cut costs. The castle will survive. The question is in what form? As a living royal residence? A museum? Something in between? The answer will reveal what Britain values more: heritage or utility, tradition or pragmatism, symbolism or substance. The debate is coming. Climate pressures will force it. Economic pressures will intensify it. Generational change will accelerate it. Within the next few decades, Britain will have to make hard choices about Windsor. What to keep, what to change, how much to spend, and why. Those choices will define the monarchy's future. They'll also define Britain's relationship with its past. The money spent on Windsor over 1,000 years is incalculable. Hundreds of millions of pounds. Billions in modern terms. Enough to build entire cities, fund wars, transform economies, all poured into a single building, because that building represents something: power, continuity, national identity. The question is whether those representations are worth the price, and who gets to decide. The monarchs who live there have always decided. Spent freely. Passed the bills to subjects, taxpayers, future generations. But that arrangement is changing. Slowly, reluctantly. The public wants a say, wants transparency, wants justification. The old answers aren't enough anymore. Tradition rings hollow when hospitals close for lack of funds. Heritage feels insufficient when housing crises go unaddressed. Windsor must justify itself, not with pageantry, with outcomes. What does Britain gain from this expense? Tourism, yes. But is it enough? Soft power, maybe. But can it be measured? National pride? Possibly. But for whom? These questions have answers, but they're not simple, they're not satisfying, and they're not the answers Windsor's defenders want to give. The castle stands. Stone and history. Nearly 1,000 years survived. Fires, wars, neglect, scandal. It endures. But endurance is not the same as value, and survival is not the same as success. Windsor has bankrupted more than one monarch, drained treasuries, consumed fortunes. The bills have always come due. They're coming due now. Tens of millions per year, every year, forever. The question is how long Britain will keep paying, and what breaking point looks like. A fire worse than 1992, a security breach that can't be contained, a climate disaster that makes the castle uninsurable, or simply the slow erosion of public support. The arithmetic turning against Windsor, not dramatically, but inevitably. When the cost finally exceeds what the public will tolerate, that moment hasn't arrived yet, but it's coming. Windsor can feel it in every budget debate, every repair estimate, every news story questioning royal spending. The castle has survived 1,000 years, but the next 100 are far from guaranteed. The oldest occupied castle in the world may become the most expensive museum, or the most notorious monument to excess. The choice is Britain's, and the clock is ticking. The walls don't speak, but if they could, they'd tell stories of endless expense. Kings who spent beyond their means, queens who poured fortunes into stone, governments that paid the bills and called it duty, workers who built, maintained, and served, tourists who visited and never saw the cost, and the future pressing in, uncertain, expensive, inevitable. Windsor Castle, the forgotten money pit, the royal black hole, the most beautiful financial disaster in British history. Still standing, still stunning, still bleeding money, and no end in sight. If you found this investigation revealing, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, what other royal properties hide expensive secrets? Buckingham Palace, Balmoral, Sandringham. Which one should we investigate next? Your support makes these deep dives possible. Thank you for watching. The bills, as always, continue.